I'm Anthony Welroth, and welcome to Eyes on Como, where we put a spotlight on Columbia and Boone County, Missouri, local government and politics. And today, we need to talk about the Columbia Police Department, specifically this story reported by KOMU last night, entitled Target 8, CPD Officers Violate Body Camera Policy During 2021 Officer-Involved Shooting. And this is reporting on an officer-involved shooting, which that's not a great term. This is an officer that shot somebody. Let's be clear. Officers shot and killed somebody. That is their involvement in 2021 outside the Vibes nightclub in downtown Columbia. So, as KMU reports, this happened on November 14th, 2021, and officers responded after they heard a volley of gunshots, approximately 10 to 15 gunshots, near the Vibes nightclub. Officers show up on the scene and they see one Keon Jacobs running from the scene. Keon Jacobs, this is the man that the officers killed. I'm going to put his picture up right here. It's just important to take a minute and remember that this was an entire person with an entire life, and now he doesn't have it because of everything that happened on this night. And I also think it's important to note that if there was 10 to 15 gunshots and you show up and somebody is running from the scene, running is generally a reasonable thing to do when you hear gunshots. So the officers give chase, and they say that he looked as if he was running suspiciously, as if he had both hands on a gun. They end up chasing him down an alley, and he was shot 13 times. The important thing here, though, is that, there's a million important things. KOMU's article focuses on the violations of the body cam policy, and that is more than worth going into, and we will go into. But today, we're going to go into the inconsistencies on the testimonies from both officers involved in this shooting, as well as from Police Chief Jeff Jones. So this article doesn't name the officers involved, but it calls them Officer A and Officer B. So first, we're going to start with Officer A's account of what had happened. This is reading right from the KOMU article. The video showed Officer A chasing Jacobs into an alley between Plaza Tire and Vibes Lounge on North 5th Street, then firing their weapon at Jacobs. Officer A continued firing shots into Jacobs after he fell to the ground. For some unknown reason, the suspect fell face first to the ground, Officer A said in the interview. Officer A said they saw the gun on the concrete after Jacobs fell to the ground. Then Officer A said they shot Jacobs. I don't remember a specific number. I think it was around 8. I wasn't counting rounds, Officer A said. He stopped moving and I stopped shooting. So first of all, that's a really flippant way to describe killing somebody. But let's break down the key points of his claim. He said he chased Jacobs into the alley. For some unknown reason, Jacobs fell face first to the ground. Then he saw the gun. Then he fired shots. Those are the clear points as Officer A laid them out. So let's go on to Officer B and Officer B's testimony. Officer B said during their interview they had finished a traffic stop on 7th Street and Broadway when they heard 8 to 15 gunshots near Vibes Lounge. So notice we've gone from 10 to 15 down to 8 to 15 gunshots. 8 to 15, that's twice as many. Inconsistencies everywhere. Was it 8 or 15? Was it 10 to 15? Who knows? Anyways, after parking their patrol car near Plaza Tire, Officer B said they saw Officer A chasing someone, who was later identified as Jacobs. Officer B said they ran after where Officer A chased Jacobs into the alley and opened fire. Officer A fires, I fire, and the guy falls to the ground. I fired twice, Officer B said. So, according to Officer B, the order goes, Officer A fires, I fire, then the guy falls to the ground. Officer A said, the guy falls to the ground, I saw the gun, then I fired. So that's a blatant contradiction, and KOMU doesn't even point that out in their own reporting. I have lots of problems with journalism as it exists in this town. It's never done as well as it should be, or even the bare minimum, to be honest with you. I'm really glad that KOMU investigated this and is reporting on it. But when they're reporting directly contradictory statements from the two officers involved, and it's not even clear that the person reporting this noticed it, that's a problem. I'm not a journalist. I don't have a journalism background. But in just reading this and talking about it with the people that I talk to on a daily basis, we notice these things and we notice the failings in their reporting. And if we're amateurs and we can notice the failings in their reporting, they need to do better. So now for a third account of this shooting, and one that, in my opinion, KOMU absolutely should have included in this reporting, we're going to go back to Police Chief Jeff Jones when he first gave a briefing on this shooting the night that it happened. So, this reads, and I quote from Jeff Jones, "Good morning. Today, November 14th, at approximately 3:03 a.m., Columbia police officers intervened in an incident in progress at Vibes Lounge, 19 North 5th Street. Their intervention resulted in the death of a 30-year-old black male, and his next of kin has been notified. I want to reiterate that this happened at Vibes Lounge, not inside of Vibes Lounge. Here's a timeline of what took place. At approximately 3:03 a.m., officers were in the immediate area of Vibes Lounge, as well as other parts of downtown, managing crowd dynamics and monitoring overall safeties. Officers heard shots and observed two people engaging in gunfire. One of the suspects fled from the scene on foot to the north, and their whereabouts are unknown at this time. Officers also saw a male running south on North 5th Street and firing his weapon north into a crowd of people. The male rounded the corner, turning west into the alley. Two officers gave chase and fired their service weapons, killing the man." So, Chief Jones describes Keon Jacobs being observed running from the crowd and firing the weapon behind him as he goes. And that is completely absent from the accounts of the two officers involved. So very interesting. Three very different accounts. Officer A says he chased Keon Jacobs fell, and then he shot him. Officer B says he ran into that alley. Officer A and him both shot Keon Jacobs, then Keon Jacobs fell, and then they continued shooting him. Jeff Jones says Keon Jacobs was observed running from the scene, firing behind him into a crowd. What happened? Which one is it? It can't be all three of those. It really cannot. So moving further down the KOMU article, we come to a part labeled CPD's response. And they interview Lieutenant Clinton Sinclair, a special investigations commander with CPD. And they ask him about obstacles police officers face while responding to a scene where deadly force may be required. "Sometimes we make mistakes," Sinclair said. So, this immediately rang a bell in my head. "Sometimes we make mistakes," Sinclair said. I actually know of something very similar said in a radio interview that Sinclair was present for. I have a transcript of this that I actually go back to often because it's one of the more enlightening things that a Columbia police officer has ever said, in my opinion. So this was an interview on KFRU back in 2021, and Lieutenant Sinclair appeared with another lieutenant, Mike Hester. And so here's a couple of quotes from Lieutenant Mike Hester. Again, this was January 1st, 2022, a couple of months after a couple of officers had killed Keon Jacobs. He said, "I'm going to give one more analogy I gave, and I'll be quiet, is Tom Brady's arguably the best quarterback ever in the NFL. If you watch football every now and then, he mistakenly throws a pass to a guy that's 6'6", wearing a different colored uniform for the opposite team. You know, how does that happen? What was it a purposeful thing, or was it, some level of miscalculation on his part? And this is the thing I'll tell you. I love people. I'm not defending the officers so much as I'm just saying as a community, this has to be a part. It's not the only part, but it has to be a part of our conversation about these tragic and ugly events that go on." So here is Lieutenant Mike Hester describing using deadly force in an inappropriate manner as a similar situation to Tom Brady throwing an interception. And of course, he's got to use Tom Brady and says arguably the best quarterback ever in the NFL because, of course, our officers are arguably the best officers ever in the history of police. So if Tom Brady throws interceptions sometimes, our police officers are going to kill black people sometimes. Those are just the facts of life, and it has to be a part of the conversation, not the whole conversation. Brilliant stuff from Mike Hester there. And another part of that interview, he says, and And so our conversation off the air was that these things happen in fractions of a second, right? And then the analogy I gave was, but first I want to say, like, I'm not defending these officers, okay? So what I'm talking about is humanity. Police officers are human beings. Human beings have a central nervous system and a brain that operates fairly consistently throughout the entire human population. There's no difference. So the analogy I gave was if a dog runs out in front of you, how hard did you press the brake pedal? So again, his analogy here is that stopping yourself from shooting a black person is asking too much of a reflex. If you don't have enough reflexes to hit the brake pedal to not run over a dog, you don't have the reflexes to stop yourself from shooting a black person. Comparing dogs to black people, killing black people to running over dogs, killing black people to throwing interceptions themselves, to Tom Brady. This is what our police officers think here in Columbia. They repeat themselves frequently because, again, our other lieutenant was present for this, and then he mimicked that when he said mistakes happen. This is why people say Black Lives Matter, because in the eyes of our police officers, it's clear that they don't. If I was a black person in our community, I would be scared for my life of the police for reasons like this, among many more. I always end these videos saying, keep your eyes on Como, and this time I really mean it. Keep your eyes on Como because things are really heating up right now, and we're going to have a lot more to share soon.